So before I start, let me tell you what we're going to do, okay? Because we may have to move the microphones, or we may have to slide chairs or something. But I'm going to make some opening remarks, okay? And then I'm going to flip to Director Barber. Director Barber's going to flip to, Chief Barber. Then he's going to flip to Director Batiste, who's going to then go to Chief Prime. So as y'all look at this setup, what's going to cause the least amount of movement to make sure we get this right? We don't mind stopping to readjust. So what's your suggestion?
Rather than move the mics and say y'all can just start with it.
Okay, y'all, are y'all good with that? Everybody good? We'll be glad. We're going to make statements and then we'll take questions, okay? Yep. This one? Yeah. We appreciate the media being here this afternoon. We know that one of the foremost things, if not the foremost thing on everyone's mind right now, is the violent gun crime that we all experienced this past weekend. We have been diligently dealing with this since it started. Really, it started probably Thursday night, but not only that, we've been dealing with it for several years, okay? I want to say this, that in my opinion, the criminal justice system is broken. I'm going to give you some symptoms of that. As quickly as we can make arrests, what we find is that violent offenders are immediately back out on the street. One of the things this does is this creates a sense of that the justice system has failed. And that's why we see some people taking into their own hands, justice, which is a sad state to find our city and our country in. Another symptom is right now today we have 142 murder cases awaiting the grand jury. We have 193 murder cases awaiting trial. We have a total of 335 untried murder cases. Many of these people are walking the streets today. The lack of speedy trials emboldens criminals. The decisions by some judges to put a preference on individuals' rights to the bail over the collective right of public safety is having serious and deadly consequences. We have people shooting at police and innocent bystanders being injured in the pathway. I'm going to use every single influence of the mayor's office and this administration to hit every touch point we can in the criminal justice system to make sure that we all, the administration, our policing, and the criminal justice system does what's needed to be done because our citizens expect us to do that. So at this time, I'd like to call on Director Barber to make a few remarks.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think we all heard about this incredible backlog or severe backlog in court cases that we're trying to get caught up. And certainly COVID did exacerbate the problem, but COVID was not the problem. We had a backlog of cases long before COVID. It only made it even incredibly more severe. So we've had multiple meetings with the presiding judge, Michael Young-Peter, or at least I have as recently as this morning, about trying to get these backlog cases cleared up. Some of the things that we were able to accomplish since they lifted the COVID bans or the COVID restrictions was dealing not only with Michael Young-Peter, the presiding judge of the circuit court, but we also dealt with the Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice Parker in trying to get some of these backlogs adjusted. So one of our proposals was to get a special court that would take care of these violent criminal cases, especially the older ones, and get them into the court system. So there are 3 special appointments that are retired judges. That's Judge Charlie Graddick, Judge John Lockett, and Judge Rick Stout. All of those are available to start hearing all of these cases that are now in backlog. The city has also provided the funding for a court reporter for this 9th jury room that will hear these overload cases. And we also are providing support to that courtroom as well. For the past 3 years, the city of Mobile, along with the county, both have contributed to the budget so that we could keep at least minimal staffing levels within the court system. That's $500,000 from the city and $500,000 from the county. All of that rolls off this year. The memorandum of understanding ends on September the 30th. So we worked with our legislators to make sure that we included into the state budget this year the replacement fund so that we can keep at least minimum staffing. And we've asked for even additional funding for the court system so that they can catch up this backlog of cases. One of the other things that we have been able to achieve that all of you will see on the general ballot this year is Anaya's law. And I think a lot of you have heard of Anaya's law, or at least some of you have. But Anaya's law is a constitutional amendment. When you hear the mayor talking about we got violent repeat offenders that are being released back into the streets of Mobile, and many of them walking around today. I know when I checked back at the 1st of December, we had 125 murder suspects that were released out on bail that were walking the streets awaiting trial. Anaya's law, on some of the judges, they are adamant that everybody has an individual right to bail. What we've argued is the collective rights of the public to be safe is also outweighs the individual right to bail in these violent cases. Anaya's law provides a constitutional amendment to the Alabama Constitution, which, keep in mind that we're dealing with 21st century threats with a 1901 Constitution. And so that is why it's so important that we go before a judge, and if we can show two things. One, that the evidence in the case is sufficient to support a conviction, because everybody is considered innocent until proven guilty. And the second component is that there is a likelihood to reoffend if released on a violent crime, that person be held without bail until trial. And that'll put a stop to what a lot of people are perceiving as a failure of the system to protect them and their families by releasing violent criminals back into the street, oftentimes before the family even has a chance to bury their loved one. So with that, I'm going to flip it over to Director Batiste.
You heard the mayor talk about the system, the symptoms of the criminal justice system. I'm here to talk about the fundamental responsibility of government, and that's public safety. And the fundamental responsibility of parenthood is to make sure that you raise your children and you make sure you give them proper guidance. Far too many times we have buried young people in this community because parents have not stepped up and embraced their roles as parents. We need them to step up to the plate and do their part in eradicating this city of violent crime. The incidents that we continue to see are really just symptomatic failures on parents to do their job. So we need them to step forward so that we can move forward and prevent some of this violent behavior that we're seeing in our community. With that, I'll shift to Chief Prime.
All right, just a couple of things real quick. The police department understands we have things to do. We've got to do a better job at recruitment and certainly retaining the quality officers that we do have. But I think it's important, and I can give you statistics, that policing is not the problem. It's the judicial system. We cannot arrest our way out of it. You, as the media has seen, the vast amount of arrests that we have made with the violent offenders over the last 4 or 5 months, in and every day. The men and women of the department are doing it better than they've ever done it at the department in my career. But it's proven that we can't arrest our way out of this. I think it's important to know, I can cite 2 cases where our victims who are now dead were on bond for some type of violent crime. That's unacceptable because the offender today becomes the victim tomorrow. I think it's important to note, and I'm not ready to release a name yet, but we have an individual that was dismissed on a murder charge back in 2016. That individual got off the murder charge because of a technicality in the court system, which is unacceptable. That individual today is on the street. He is wanted for multiple violent felony charges. And we believe that individual was responsible that led off the chain of events with a double homicide Friday on March the 18th. And it snowballed from there. And then, of course, that carried over into the shooting that you understand and seen last night at the same location at Azalea Road and Cottage Hill. We've got to understand we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We need help. We need help not only from the prosecutor's office, but the judicial system. And to say that it is broken is an understatement. Mayor?
So we'll be glad to take your questions, and we may continue to switch chairs if that's what you would prefer us to do, if that's best.
Well, you referenced the backlog of cases and that somehow is contributing to this weekend's violence, but there's only been 2 arrests out of 17 known shootings. So have you identified more suspects? And are those suspects repeat offenders who are out on bond awaiting murder trials?
Yeah, so here's the thing. I don't want to get into the specifics as to who our person of interest is in reference to the double homicide. That is one example. I could give you a litany of examples of the people that are currently on bond today that are committing these horrible offenses out in the community. And you say, well, how does that affect? Well, it affects everything, because if the individual that we have named as a person of interest within the department, and we're certainly trying to locate him, if it turns out to be the case, then our point is exactly that all these numbers that you receive today are these violent offenders that are out committing the crimes, they're continuing to commit the crimes, and in some cases are becoming the victims. And if not them, then their families are, with the shooting into the occupied vehicles and the dwellings that you have seen a vast uptick in the last 6-7 months.
How much of this weekend's violence is gang-related and retaliatory violence?
Well, as you can imagine, I mean, we're coming off the last 72 hours, and that's really a great question, but that's going to take time. It takes time for the investigators to get involved in the case, to try to sort out who offenders are, who victims are, who the victims are related to. And I think at some point, in the near future, we'll be able to give you an idea of how many of those are actually gang-related, and I think that's a question that we can certainly answer. I just can't give you that answer today.
Chief Bryan, the permitless carry goes into effect next year. It's still in effect now. Are you afraid that that is going to make this worse? We're already seeing it pretty bad, and the permit is still in place.
Yeah, so, the permitless carry, there's no doubt it was a tool for us, but there are still tools in the toolbox that we can use. Arresting people that are prohibited from carrying a firearm, arresting people for persons that are forbidding, domestic-related issues. So there are a lot of things and a lot of tools that we can still use, but we've never hung all things law enforcement on the no pistol permit at all.
The majority of the shootings that happened this weekend, from Cottage Hill to Government back to Cottage Hill, happened very heavily populated areas where people are driving past or are congregating like the vigil. There are people that are scared. I mean, there are people that are worried about going out there and worried that they're going to get caught up in this retaliatory or whatever it may be violence. What are you guys doing to make sure that, the average person is safe?
Yeah, so I think as a whole, it's important to understand that most of these shootings that you've seen are retaliatory. And just because we know sometimes the offenders, it's not always as easy to make the case. Most of these perpetrators know who their intended target is. The issue is the shooting in the public that creates the hazard for the bystanders or for the innocent people. And we certainly understand that. And that's why we're here today. That's why you see everybody here at this table today answering those questions. What I would like the public to know is that they are not the target. These are not random acts of violence that's being perpetrated amongst the community. Unfortunately, it's happening amongst the community.
Do we have a gang problem in Mobile?
It's an excellent question. I'll tell you this. For years, well, I think it's best to say this. We don't have the gang problems that you necessarily see on the East Coast and the West Coast, where you have an organized structure, if you will. What we do is have what I call these troubled youth in these neighborhoods that form cliques and they form sets, but they are certainly acting with gang activity, especially with the violent crime.
So it's March
Let
now.
let me answer that a second.
Sure.
A second. The question is, do we have a gang problem? yes, there's a gun violence problem, okay? No matter who's perpetrating that crime. What we're saying today is that even with all of those things that we think are problems, which they are, the problem is the breakdown of the criminal justice system. And so, yes, we can focus on what can we do to work more closely with the neighborhoods. What can we do education-wise? What can all of the support organizations do to try to help in the rehabilitation process? But none of that is going to make any difference if we can't get these violent recidivist offenders off the street. And the longer we wait to do it, the more people are going to get hurt.
So that was a question for Chief Bryan. You and I talked about, March being a big key point in having more officers, in having ShotSpotter. Where are we at with all of that, with all those new recruits, being out on their own?
So as I stated to you many times, that my commitment was to backfill the vacant positions in patrol. And at the onset of March of this year, we did that with the release of some new recruits that went solo in the field to patrol. And that was by design, because at the time, we were having the vast majority of our violent crimes in the north and south sides of Mobile, or the 1st and the 3rd precincts. And we have seen the incremental reductions that we expected to see. But when someone's intent on killing someone, how do you stop that? There's no way to stop that, because then that means you would have to know where it is going to be and when it's going to be. To your greater question of ShotSpotter, it is still on track, and my understanding is that we're looking at being live with it May the 1st, but we also have to understand that we're not the ones implementing ShotSpotter per se in terms of all the equipment and technicality that goes with it. We're depending on a number of people to make that happen.
Any talk about creating even more precincts to help solve the problem?
No, sir, I think we're fine on the precincts. The precincts really isn't the problem. The geographical areas really isn't the problem. The problem really gets back to the judicial system. The numbers that the mayor gave you are astonishing, and if these folks were locked up, and hopefully with the passing of Anaya's law, I certainly believe that we can start locking these recidivist offenders up and start curtailing some of this crime.
The passing of Anaya's law is until there's a vote in November, is that correct?
Well,
That's correct.
yeah.
Let me speak to the ShotSpotter. Obviously, ShotSpotter is part of a greater picture, Project EchoStop. And so ShotSpotter is just a single component of Project EchoStop. And so ShotSpotter alone will not address the concerns that we are bringing to you at the table today. What we're talking about today is a criminal justice system that is broken. ShotSpotter is a component that will help us identify and detect these type of crimes after they occur. What we need is the ability to be able to prosecute these crimes in a more rapid succession of where we need to get to. And so while we're looking forward to having ShotSpotter here, it is part of a greater package that encompasses technology, also encompasses the ability to allocate manpower to address some of the things that we see as we move forward when we get Project EchoStop on board. So please don't look at ShotSpotter as the end-all, the be-all that will solve the problems of violent crime in our community.
We know it's 17 shootings and there's 3 deaths. Are any of you aware of another more violent weekend in recent history? Or is this the most violent weekend that you can remember?
I didn't look at that data before I came in here, and it's certainly something that we can look at and look historically to see if that exists. And if it does, we'll provide it for you at a later time. But I'm not aware of anything.
So many shootings
Yes.
in such a short time. I'm just curious if you remember another time period where it was this many shootings in such a short period.
We tend to do this in 1 month.
We really would have to,
Yeah.
we'd have to go back and look, in recent history, no, but, if we look back further on.
The shooting out of the grounds, how was a gun able to get into that facility? And is there a need now in the aftermath of the last shooting as well to harden our sports and entertainment facilities and high school stadiums?
Well, the grounds is a private venue, And, I think you have to understand that they hire private security, and it's my understanding that the private security was responsible for the interior part of the security. But that is being looked at as we speak, so we can make a definitive answer where the failure was and the breakdown was, and to ensure going forward that if they are going to do it, to work with the folks at the ground so they can seek out advice with the police department to determine the adequate resources they need.
Are you all worried about speeding up the court process and that might put the wrong person in prison for the crime?
Well, speeding up the process wouldn't do that. I mean, we make cases as we make cases, and, there's a system in place for that that's built upon probable cause and certainly evidence, both physical and circumstantial. That's not the issue. The issue is that the cases are not being heard. They're not being tried. And if we lock people up and we have the ability to lock them away, they're not going to be out in the community, in our community, committing these violent crimes.
The ninth special court that you referenced, when will that be up and running? And do we have enough jurors to fill in? I know you've got the judges that can hear the cases. You've got some staffing resources that the city will be providing. When will we see that?
Well, the courtroom is actually being used now. And so I went and met with Judge Young Peter this morning about making sure that we're assigning some of these Class A violent crimes, especially the older cases, to that court. So we have many of the numbers that you heard us talking about on these murder cases are in excess of 3 years old. And that is very problematic for us because witnesses' memories fade, officers' memories fade, officers may no longer be employed here. And so it becomes increasingly difficult, and I think somebody brought up the speedy trial issue, I think. But there is a right to speedy trial, but what we're seeing is defense attorneys are not motioning for those rights because it's to their advantage to allow that case to get older and older, and then it becomes unprosecutable.
When will you start with this night, this special court?
The court's already up. The court reporter's retained, the support is there, the judges are already appointed, they've already been hearing cases. My concern, though, is to make sure they're hearing the oldest, most violent cases and not just criminal cases. And so that was the meeting this morning with the presiding judge.
Mayor Stimson or Chief Prime, what's something you would like to see either the legislature or even Congress or somebody, some law, either the state or federal government do to address the criminal justice system you think would go a long way here in Mobile to,
So, the biggest thing.
Three answers to that.
So, to me, one of the single most important factors that we face in the state of Alabama right now is to get this constitutional amendment passed, all right? Now, if I keep reminding everybody, we're dealing with 21st century threats with the 1901 Constitution. They did not have high-capacity weapons back in 1901. So violent criminals are able to commit a lot of very serious violent acts, and we are seeing collateral damage. How somebody was not hit last night, I have no idea. But I think there was something like 70 rounds that were fired in that parking lot. And so we're talking to, have we ever seen violence like this in a weekend? I've never seen this many rounds exchanged from Friday through Sunday as we have seen. How it didn't result in more injuries and death than actually occurred is pretty remarkable, if you ask me. But that would be the biggest thing, is to make sure that we got Anaya's law. One of the other things I do want to say is that the city has also stepped in to provide virtual courtrooms for all of our jury rooms as well as our district courts. We've done it in our municipal courts. That will not only expedite the trial process, but it will prevent another shutdown like we saw during the pandemic. Mayor.
We pointed out that we had been in touch with Chief Justice of the Supreme Court about the funding for the city of Mobile. And if you asked, is this something that state legislators or what can be done at the state level? One is that Mobile over the last couple of decades has had insufficient funding for our court system. We need to have 9 circuit judges, and we've only had 8. And so the funding of that position would be very critical to this. But also, I think you've picked up on this, but because of the efforts that the administration has made, working with the Chief Justice, working with the presiding judge, is to stand up a special courtroom solely for the purpose of trying to catch up with criminal trials. But they've got to put the most violent crimes and the oldest crimes, they've got to start assigning those cases and start hearing them before we're going to see any change. But I can guarantee you, if we will start having the criminal trials and we will catch up with them, and we put away these people who are known recidivist offenders who are going to keep on shooting, if we will get this in place, you will see a reduction in crime. And I think that unanimously that we would tell you that. And in other cities where this is going on, if they step up and they do what we're saying, you will see the outcome that the citizens are expecting. So we need your help. We need the help of the media. I mean, every week, or every 2 weeks, you're asking us, what are we doing about policing? No, it's really about policing. What do you do about crime? Well, the thought is about policing. It's time to start asking other questions of other people that are involved in this process. What are they doing? Where's their scorecard? And so, look, if it was with a lot of, I'm going to say, concern before we came here and said the criminal justice system is broken. That looks like all we're trying to do is pass the buck. And I promise you, we're not trying to pass the buck. This is a plea for help, okay, for our entire community. We will, if you will tell us something that we haven't identified that we can do about a job, we will do about a job at it. The chief made the comment, we're working on recruitment. We're working on retention. Our policemen have the finest equipment that any police department in the country has, trying to help us thwart crime from a technology standpoint. And so there's really, within the law, there's nothing we won't do to make you safe.
Have you brought the district attorney on board with this plan of getting these older cases? Is the district attorney's office prepared to put these trials on?
That's right. That's right.
Are you saying it's the
Look,
breakdown
no,
of the district
well,
attorney's office?
I'm saying if the media knows, they know the steps, they know they know the roles that everybody plays in this. You know the policing role, you know the district court role, you know the district attorney's role, the court, and it's just time to start delving into where are we? What can we all do to do better?
You said, you're trying to retain officers. I know a few weeks ago, the police department spoke with city council about pay in Mobile, and it's the lowest of most of the
Yep.
police departments around here. Are there steps to
Yes,
include that?
there are steps right now. We're looking at increasing the pay of our policemen, and that'll be that'll, matter of fact, be before the next budget cycle. Yeah.
How far down are we in personnel to get to an optimal level that you'd all like to be?
Go. We'll get this figured out in a minute.
I think one of the key things is optimal level. The problem that we're having right now is we're not even able to hit budgeted strength, much less any optimal level of policing. So if you look at a ratio of 2.5, given the consideration of how large of a jurisdictional area that the city of Mobile has, which is rather unique in the state of Alabama to have that many people, but we should probably have about 650 officers. We're down to about 413 officers. We lost 111 last year, so that shows you the gravity of what we're dealing with. The ones that are working are tired, they're stressed, and so we've got to get some relief there. We understand that. We're working very hard to make sure that happens. But I will say that it's a problem that's not unique to Mobile, that we're seeing it across the country, as well as the spikes in violent crime, which seem almost correlated. But I will tell you that until you fix the criminal justice system itself, that keeps, in all of you being reporters, have ran story after story after story of violent repeat offenders released on bond only to commit more violent crime, right? So you, of all people, understand the problem that we're facing. But you could double the size of the police force tomorrow, and it would not have a significant impact on crime until you fix the system and make sure that we get these trials underway.
Mr. Batiste, tomorrow, I think the council's got about $525,000 appropriation or expenditure for the implementation of the technology for shot spotter. And I think one of the concerns was on surveillance. Have those concerns been addressed? Is there a concern that this equipment, could be in other cities has been used to detect? It's called a surveillance concern, I guess.
So I think we've at least tried to address the surveillance concerns, and so I'm hoping that as we move forward with that tomorrow we get a vote on the Alabama Power contract.
And then finally, I know in some cities throughout the country where this has been implemented, there's been some prosecutors, there's been some national stories that, you know, they haven't even looked at the ShotSpotter program when they're doing investigations and stuff along those lines. Is there any concerns about the implementation and trying to line it up with other departments in the criminal justice system?
So my thoughts of this is that if you have a piece of technology and if you have a tool in your tool belt and you're not utilizing all the tools that you have available to you to do a better job, then I think that you fail the people that you've asked for permission to move forward with that project. And so we don't intend to bring a system online that we will not put the other resources in place to make sure that we are getting the very best back out of it. So we're not just dealing with technology, but we're dealing with manpower as well that will be responsible for reviewing what happens with ShotSpotter and what happens with the Alabama Power cameras, reviewing that data on a daily basis so that we can make adjustments to our resources to make sure that ultimately, not that we just use it as a tool to apprehend, but actually use it as a tool for deterrence as we move forward, because that is our key, is to get to the point where we're preventing these crimes from occurring. Initially, it'll start out as a tool that will help us apprehend, but the ultimate goal for us in making the decision to move forward with Project Echo Stop is to put the best thing in place to deter criminal behavior, and particularly violent criminal behavior in our community.
You're talking about a rollout around May 1st? Is that
Somewhere between May 1st and June 1st is what we're looking at.
Mayor, could you clarify just your remarks when it comes to the district attorney's office and its role in all of this? Is there some reluctance there, or the lack of preparedness, or how would you describe what kind of the breakdown with the plan with trying to get the backlog of cases to get those moving over the pipeline? What's the problem?
Yeah. So we've been working very closely with the district attorney's office since the lower part of last year to try to get all these jury trials back up. So to answer your question, yes, we have engaged the prosecutors as well. In that meeting this morning was one of the prosecutors from Ashley Rich's office that came in to help us get some of these murder cases up on the docket.
So they're on board, they're ready to roll with these older cases to try to get them to cycle through?
Right, and I still need to get a conversation with the district attorney. If you heard the mayor, there's still 142 cases that are pending grand jury. So we have to be able to move those, or it's the DA's office that moves them through the grand jury, and then we have to be prepared to go to jury trial. So those cases, as they begin to move them through grand jury, will eventually end up on a circuit judge's docket for trial. So we're trying to make sure all those components are funded sufficiently, staffed sufficiently, so that we can proceed with jury trials.
Mayor, do you have anything that you would want to say from the mayor's perspective over all of the violence that we've seen this weekend? Because as I said to Chief Ryan, I know people are scared and they're concerned. Do you want to say anything from your perspective?
So the question was about feeling safe. And I think that a lot of that has to do with possibly where you live in the city of Mobile, which it shouldn't be that way. You ought to feel safe no matter where you live. Know that our police and the administration are doing everything we can to make sure these kind of events don't occur. If you look at last night, what happened, there was a vigil, okay, and this really, typically the vigil is held after someone's buried, okay, but they wanted to have it last night. Well, the chief was there. We had an abundance of officers there trying to make sure, but still, if there's a retaliatory action, it's hard to to maybe thwart that crime. But the ordinary citizen that's driving up and down the streets of Mobile, walking in and out of the grocery store, there is nothing really to worry about. But that's going to be a decision that they have to make. But know that we're doing every single thing we can to make sure that they are safe, and it will happen as we start seeing some of these criminals put away.
Everybody good?
Thank you.
When did that night start?
We started trying to get it up and running